My name is David, and for most of my life I have carried a quiet longing, the sort of hunger that never quite leaves but seldom shows on the surface. At 22, I had friends, ambitions, and the appearance of stability, but under all of it was a sense of being adrift, searching for something unnamed. Perhaps that is why I so easily said yes when Michael, my closest friend, invited me to spend the night at his house one Friday evening. Michael and I had known each other since secondary school. He was warm, funny, quick to laugh, and endlessly comfortable in his own skin. Beside him I often felt more cautious, more restrained, though I valued his presence because he drew me into life. That evening he had called, his tone casual as always, "Come over, stay the night. It's been ages." I agreed before he even finished, unaware that the decision would set in motion an unraveling I could neither anticipate nor control. When I arrived at his house, dusk had already stretched across the neighborhood. The place stood quietly dignified, a two-story home with warm light spilling through the windows. Michael greeted me at the door, grinning as though no time had passed since we last met. His energy filled the hallway, but what caught me off guard was the figure that appeared behind him, his father, Richard. That I had met him once years ago in passing, yet that memory had dulled with time. Now he stood before me with a presence that unsettled me at once. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a calm authority in his movements. His hair was streaked with silver, his eyes sharp and intent. He extended his hand with polite warmth, and though the gesture was ordinary, the moment carried an undercurrent that left me faintly unsteady. "David, isn't it?" "Michael has mentioned you often," Richard said, his voice deep, even, and lingering in the air longer than it should have done. I nodded, offering a polite smile, but inside I felt a ripple I couldn't name. It was only a handshake, only a welcome, yet the weight of his attention clung to me as Michael pulled me inside. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, wine for Richard, water for us. Michael's mother moved about with
Sleep never
ease,
truly found me that
though
night.
I noticed
The house was
Richard more
silent,
than
yet inside me a
anyone else
restlessness
at the
swelled like an
table.
unbroken tide. Michael's steady
Every
breathing was a
time his
reminder of
gaze
innocence,
flicked
a friendship
toward me,
untainted, but I could not
felt
mirror
as
it.
if I had
My
been
thoughts
caught
wandered
in a
back again and
quiet
again to Richard,
spotlight.
the man whose presence at dinner had unsettled me with a
He
force I
didn't
could not explain
stare,
that at last,
not
surrendering to
overtly,
sleeplessness. I
but
slipped
the
quietly from the
glances were
mattress.
deliberate,
The door creaked as I
enough to
opened it,
leave
and
my
I froze,
chest
glancing at
tightening.
Michael. He did not
never
stir.
oblivious,
My bare feet carried me
filled
into the corridor,
evening
where
with
shadows stretched
stories,
long against the walls.
university
I moved without
mishaps,
intention, guided
failed
more by
cooking
instinct than reason, until the faint glow of a
his
lamp
new
drew me toward the living
obsession
room.
with
Richard sat alone on the
football
sofa, a
matches.
book resting in his lap, a half-finished
I
glass of wine
laughed
beside
when
him.
required,
He looked up at the sound
yet
of my
I was
approach, his expression
distracted.
unreadable, then softened into a small
I
smile,
found
come sleep.
myself listening
His
to
voice was
Richard's
hushed, almost
laughter
conspiratorial,
instead,
as though we already
low
shared a
and
secret that I shook my
restrained,
head, taking a
or
hesitant step
watching
closer.
the way his hand
No.
curved around
Too
the
many
stem of
thoughts.
his glass.
He gestured to the chair opposite him.
It was
Sit.
ridiculous.
Night has a way
I
of stirring
told
things to keep
myself.
buried. I lowered myself into the
He
chair,
was
my heart
Michael's
thudding.
father.
His words felt deliberate, as if they
That
carried more weight
fact
than
should
casual
have
conversation
settled
should.
everything.
For a while, silence lingered
And
between
yet
us,
it
broken
didn't.
only by the faint tick of the wall clock.
We
"What keeps
retreated
you
to
awake, David?"
Michael's
he
room.
asked finally, closing the book and setting it
He
aside.
booted up a
His
game
gaze was steady,
console,
too steady, and I felt caught in it that I
insisting we play
hesitated, then
until
spoke the truth,
exhaustion
though stripped of detail.
overtook us.
Loneliness, I suppose.
I joined
That
in,
sense that you can be
though
surrounded by people yet still feel
half-heartedly,
unseen.
my thoughts
Richard
already
leaned back,
spiraling
exhaling slowly.
elsewhere.
I know that feeling well.
Through the
Marriage
thin
isn't always what it
walls,
looks like from the
I
outside.
could hear the faint
People assume
rhythm of
constancy, but
movement
constancy
in
can
the
suffocate
living
as much as it
room.
comforts.
Richard settling
His tone
into
carried a
his
weariness, an
evening,
honesty that pulled me nearer in
perhaps
spirit if not in
reading
body.
or
Our eyes
watching
held, and in that
television.
moment an invisible current drew taut between
The
us.
awareness of
I should
his
have broken,
presence
looked away,
beneath the
said something to
same
shadow the
roof
silence.
felt charged,
But I didn't. He rose from the sofa,
almost
crossed the short
dangerous.
distance, and instead of sitting in the chair
Michael
opposite me, he lowered
surrendered
himself to the edge of the sofa
sleep,
beside mine.
controller still in
Close
hand.
enough that the faint scent of his cologne reached me,
His
wood and smoke and
breathing
something darker.
deepened, his
My breath
body
shortened, you're different from the friends
slapped
Michael
with
usually brings around, he said, his voice
I
quieter
lay
now.
on the
How
guest
so?
mattress
I managed,
beside
though
his
the words
bed,
trembled. There's a gravity to
staring
you,
at the ceiling.
a depth. His hand rested
The
on the arm of
house
the
had
sofa,
quieted,
inches from mine.
but my mind
Not touching,
had not.
but near enough to burn. The air grew heavy.
Every
My skin
detail
tingled,
of
alive with
Richard's
awareness.
earlier gestures
My better judgment
replayed
screamed at me to retreat,
themselves.
to stand, to
His
leave the room before I
smile,
crossed a line
the
that could never be
cadence of his
uncrossed.
words,
But I
the
stayed, when his
slight
fingers brushed
narrowing
mine.
of
The
his
contact was
eyes
almost
when they
imperceptible,
met
yet it
mine
shattered
that
every
I
fragile
turned
boundary I
onto
had
my
clung to.
side,
My pulse roared in my
restless.
ears. I turned to him, and in the
Something
dim glow of
had
the lamp, our
shifted,
faces were closer than they should have
subtle
been.
but
For a moment he hovered at the undeniable.
edge,
suspended between resistance and
a
surrender.
boundary I
Then
hadn't
Richard leaned
even
in,
known
closing the
existed
distance,
had
and his
been
lips touched
brushed,
mine. That IT was not a
leaving me
hurried kiss,
taut
but a
with
deliberate one, restrained and
anticipation.
searching. My body went
I
rigid, then
told
softened,
myself
drawn
it
into the
was
warmth and the
nothing,
danger of it.
a foolish
1,000 alarms
response
clanged
to an
inside me. This
ordinary
was Michael's
evening.
father. This was betrayal. This was forbidden.
Still,
Yet
as
desire
I
drowned them
listened
all.
to the
When we
creaks
finally
of the
parted, the
settling
silence was louder
house,
than any sound.
I could not
His
shake
hand
the
lingered against
sense
mine,
that
steady and
Richard's
unashamed,
presence
while my chest
lingered
rose
in
and fell with uneven
darkness
breath.
with me,
We shouldn't. I whispered
shaping
no. He
thoughts I
agreed, though his
dared
eyes
not
contradicted the
voice
word.
that be why the
But sometimes
time
what we
I
shouldn't do is
closed my
exactly what we can't
eyes,
escape.
the certainty
I
had
sat there,
already
trapped
taken
between guilt and
root.
exhilaration,
Tonight
knowing the
would
world
not
had shifted
be like
irreversibly.
any
When I
night
finally slipped back
before.
into Michael's room, the guest mattress felt foreign beneath me. My lips still tingled, my thoughts spiraled, and one truth clung to me with suffocating clarity: what had happened tonight was not a fleeting accident. It was a secret now alive between us, one that could not be undone. Morning arrived far too quickly. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, sharp and unkind, dragging Daniel out of a shallow, restless sleep. His first thought was not of Ethan, nor of the laughter they had shared the night before, but of Richard, his touch, his words, and the secrecy that now pressed against Daniel's chest like a stone. When Daniel emerged from the guest room, Ethan was already in the kitchen, pouring cereal, humming to himself as though the world was ordinary. His easy smile should have been comforting, but instead, it deepened Daniel's unease. He forced a greeting, careful to steady his tone, though his eyes instinctively searched for Richard. Richard appeared minutes later, dressed neatly, his composure intact. To anyone else, he was the same father he had always been, polite, reliable, unshaken. Yet Daniel saw the difference in the way Richard avoided his gaze, in the way he lingered at the counter, focusing too intently on pouring coffee. Every gesture was measured, restrained, as though control alone might erase the memory of the night. Ethan remained oblivious, talking about weekend plans and upcoming classes. Daniel nodded where necessary, but his thoughts were elsewhere, caught between guilt and an unfamiliar ache. The table felt like a stage, every casual word concealing a truth none of them dared to name. After breakfast, Ethan excused himself to shower, leaving Daniel alone with Richard. The silence between them was immediate, heavy. Richard set his mug down and finally looked at Daniel, his expression guarded. About last night, Richard began, his voice low. It can't happen again. You understand that? Daniel nodded, though the tightness in his chest resisted the words. I know, he whispered, though the certainty in his tone faltered. Richard leaned closer, his face taut with conflict. I crossed a line I never should have. You're Ethan's friend. I'm married. If this comes out, it destroys everything. Daniel wanted to agree, to share in the practicality of his reasoning, but the memory of their closeness refused to fade. The way Richard's eyes softened now betrayed the very caution he tried to impose. There was no denying what had passed between them, nor the magnetic pull still alive in the space separating them. I don't regret it, Daniel admitted quietly, surprising even himself. But I don't know what it means. Richard's jaw tightened, his silence revealing more than words could. His conflict was evident, responsibility clashing with desire, fear tangled with longing. Finally, he exhaled, steadying himself. What it means is that we're going to pretend it never happened. For everyone's sake. Before Daniel could answer, Ethan's voice echoed from upstairs, breaking the moment. Richard straightened, retreating into the familiar mask of fatherhood. By the time Ethan returned, cheerful and unaware, Richard had already slipped back into routine. Later, when it was time for Daniel to leave, Ethan walked him to the door, talking casually about seeing him at school next week. Richard appeared behind him, hands in his pockets, his gaze briefly meeting Daniel's before sliding away. No words were spoken, but the silence carried more weight than anything either man could have confessed aloud. As Daniel stepped outside, the crisp morning air struck him with clarity. He felt torn in two, part of him still reeling with shame, the other clinging to the rush of being wanted, of touching something forbidden. The betrayal lingered like a shadow, yet beneath it pulsed a dangerous thrill he could not deny. On the walk home, Daniel replayed every moment, searching for meaning. Was it a mistake? A secret revelation? Or simply a fleeting lapse in judgment that would haunt them both? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but one truth stood firm. Nothing between him and Richard would ever return to the way it was. The world around him looked unchanged, cars passing, children playing, the ordinary rhythm of life carrying on, but inside, Daniel felt altered. The night had revealed a side of him he could never unsee, a hunger he could never fully silence. As he closed the door behind him at home, he knew the story wasn't over. The secret bound him and Richard together, invisible yet unbreakable, a thread of temptation that might tug again the next time their paths crossed, and though he told himself to bury it, Daniel couldn't help but wonder, not if, but when. The week that followed felt like a haze I could not shake. University lectures passed in a blur, conversations with classmates seemed hollow, and every quiet moment replayed the memory of Richard's kiss. The secret weighed on me, yet it also kept me alive in ways nothing else had. Each time I closed my eyes, I was back in that living room, tasting the forbidden, hearing the low timbre of his voice in the silence of the night that I told myself to forget, to bury it as a reckless mistake, but desire has a way of refusing burial. Instead, it grows stronger in the dark. Michael called me midweek, cheerful as ever, asking when I would come by again. His words pierced me like a blade, his innocence was now the very thing that bound me in guilt. I gave him vague answers, claiming coursework was heavy, though my reluctance puzzled him. He laughed it off, but the truth lodged in my throat. 2 days later, a message arrived on my phone from an unknown number. I opened it hesitantly, only to find a single line, "We need to talk." R. My pulse surged. I should have deleted it immediately, erased the temptation, but instead I stared at the screen as though it had power over me. And perhaps it did. That evening, against better judgment, I returned to Michael Street. My steps were heavy with conflict, yet each one felt inevitable. Richard stood outside, leaning casually against his car, his presence commanding even in stillness. When our eyes met, the air thickened with everything unsaid. "You came," he said, as if testing the truth of it. "I shouldn't have," I whispered, though my body betrayed the words by drawing closer that we didn't go inside. Instead, we sat in his car, the windows fogged by our breath, the world outside blurred. Richard spoke first, his tone careful, deliberate. "What happened last week wasn't planned. But it wasn't meaningless either." I turned to him, searching his face for hesitation. There was none. Only a raw honesty that disarmed me. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted, the confession spilling out before I could restrain it. His hand found mine in the dimness, firm yet trembling. "Nor can I. But you must understand the cost." If Michael knew, he stopped, shaking his head. The sentence didn't need finishing, the betrayal already lived between us that we sat in silence, the truth settling like fog. Then, as though surrendering to the gravity pulling us closer, Richard leaned toward me again. The kiss was urgent this time, stripped of hesitation. It carried both hunger and danger, sealing the knowledge that what had begun as an accident was becoming a pattern. When at last we broke apart, I could hardly breathe. The car felt suffocating, yet stepping away felt impossible. "This isn't sustainable," I said, my voice unsteady. "Maybe not," Richard replied. His eyes glimmered with something between defiance and desperation. "But sometimes the things that can't last are the ones we crave most." The words lodged deep inside me, equal parts poison and allure. As I walked home later that night, the city lights blurred around me. Every step carried the weight of betrayal, yet every breath was laced with a reckless exhilaration. I knew I was crossing further into a labyrinth from which there might be no escape. And yet, I could not turn back. The secret was no longer a single night, it was becoming a thread that bound Richard and me together, fragile yet unbreakable. By the time I reached my door, the certainty had solidified in me, this was not an end but a beginning. And beginnings, especially forbidden ones, have a way of demanding everything.